Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer, thanks to Ross Howard for this one. Amy attacks with Moira and grizzly bears. Nick lets the Moira through unblocked, but blocks and trades with the grizzly bears. Is Amy able to return the grizzly bears to the battlefield using Moira's ability? Okay, so in order to answer this question, we're going to go through exactly what happens step by step. The first important thing that we need to notice is that none of the creatures involved have first strike or double strike. That means that all of the combat damage is going to get dealt at the same time as part of the same game event. Now, anytime anything happens in the game has to check to see if what just happened caused any triggered abilities to trigger. And of course, Moira dealing combat damage to Nick is going to cause its triggered ability to trigger. However, that triggered ability does not go on the stack just yet. Rather, there's a procedure that has to take place first. So at this point, all that happens is the fairies who are in charge of triggered abilities just write down on a whiteboard somewhere that this triggered ability has triggered and it's going to need to go on the stack eventually. Okay, so the next thing that's going to happen in this phase is a player is about to get priority. And so when a player is about to get priority, there's a couple of steps that need to happen first. And the first of those steps would be that the game performs state-based actions. Now, that would include the fact that the grizzly bears, which took lethal damage during this combat phase, is going to be getting destroyed. And so the game is going to do that first, and then afterwards, it's going to take all triggered abilities that are waiting to go on the stack, and it's going to actually put them on the stack at this point. Now, this is a very important thing because the time when you choose targets for a triggered ability isn't when it triggers. It's when the triggered ability gets put onto the stack. At the time when this triggered ability is getting put onto the stack, that's after state-based actions have been performed, and therefore that's after the grizzly bears has been put into Amy's graveyard. Accordingly, it is possible for Amy to use that triggered ability to target grizzly bears because at the time when she's choosing targets for the triggered ability, the grizzly bears is in her graveyard as required, and it meets all the other criteria. This means that Amy will be able to resurrect the grizzly bears with this triggered ability just like she had hoped. Pretty cool trick, right? Now, maybe you're Nick and you don't like that quite as much. So what could Nick do to maybe stop that? Well, one idea would be to give the Moira first strike. If Nick managed to play a spell that gave Moira first strike, then that means that creatures with first strike deal their combat damage in a completely separate combat step, completely different and before all of the other creatures that don't have first strike. And so what that would mean is that at the time when the Moira is actually dealing its combat damage with first strike, well, that would mean that it's before the grizzly bears has suffered lethal damage, and therefore it's not going to be dying. And it would not be in the graveyard in time for Amy to target it with the Moira's triggered ability. That's a really stylish answer. Now, I suppose there's one other really cool trick that I wanted to talk about regarding how Moira interacts with keyworded abilities. If you'll notice, the Moira's triggered ability does not say that you can return another target creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. It just says a creature. And so what that means is that if you were to give Moira trample and your opponent was to block with 2 1/1s, then that would mean that it would be possible for the Moira to deal combat damage in the same combat step where it actually died. And that means that you could use that trick that we talked about before to resurrect the Moira itself using its own triggered ability. Now that is really awesome. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.